I am Sonia Usatch-Kuhn, your host. Welcome to Poets on Poetry. I will be speaking with members of the North Carolina Poetry Society. We are going to be discussing the myriad components involved in the process of writing a poem. My guest today is Steve Cushman, who lives in Greensboro and works at Cone Health in the IT department. Not a place I'm good at, but I believe that he is. Steve received a master's in creative writing from Hollins University and an MFA from UNC-Greensboro. His first full-length poetry collection, How Birds Fly, won the 2018 Lena Shull Book Award, along with a short story collection called Fracture City. He is the author of, as well, of two poetry chapbooks, Hospital Work and Midnight Stroll. A new collection, The Last Time, was published by Unicorn Press in 2023. Steve has conducted writing workshops in libraries across the state, as well as the Creative Center, UNC-Greensboro, Guilford Technical Community College, Guilford College, and Cone Health. He has appeared as an instructor or speaker at literary festivals sponsored by Bookmarks, North Carolina Writers Network, Greensboro Bound, Virginia Festival of the Book, and the Carolina Mountains Literary Festival. He has judged various literary contests for the North Carolina Poetry Society, Hollins College, and Charlotte Writers Club. In his spare time, he enjoys hiking and camping. He roots for the Tampa Bay Rays. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonia.
You have quite a relationship with words, I have to say, in many genres. Did it start with poetry and expand to short stories and novels?
For me, it was actually the opposite. I started as a fiction writer, and I wrote fiction exclusively for about 20 years or so. And only about 10 years ago, started writing poetry.
Well,
Yeah.
how did that happen?
It's always an interesting story for me, at least, is I was transitioning to a new job at the time. And the new job was extremely busy, extremely time consuming, and I only had a little bit of time to write. And so I started just by trying to write down just little lines, little images, little something that weren't stories, that weren't part of a novel. And once I started doing that enough, I thought, well, maybe I should try poetry. And so I started writing poetry. And wrote a lot of really, really bad poetry
I was going to say
yes.
just like that.
No, it wasn't just like it was not successful. And certainly, even my writing this morning probably may not be successful, but it's taken quite a while and to sort of get where I'm at now. Yeah.
I have to ask you this. Did you take a poetry class?
I have had some poetry workshops. I have had some poetry workshops. Again, my degree was in fiction, and so we took fiction. I did have an occasional class, yes. And I go to Wild Acres up in Little Switzerland, and so I tend to the last 2, 3 years I've taken poetry workshops there with a lot of wonderful writers.
Yeah.
So I have taken some. Yes, I certainly have taken some classes. Yeah.
So I think of poetry as the shortest short story that anyone could write. Because if you do the images, if you have the metaphors, if you have the music and the lyric of the language, you can say a lot of things instead of, piling pages of words. What do you think?
I think that's absolutely true. I write mostly poetry and flash fiction. So most of the flash fiction that I'm writing these days, or most of the fiction I'm writing these days, is flash fiction. So it's really short. And most of my poems, I would say, are narrative poems in nature, because of my story background, that's sort of where I go. And for me, like you said, so you take those stories, they're small stories, and then you play with the language, you do different things, you have images and metaphors that maybe you highlight a little bit more than you would in a longer fiction piece. And that's sort of what makes poetry for me. Yeah.
So how long have you been doing this?
I think I said earlier 10 years. It's probably 10 to 12 years. I think it was 2012 I transitioned to a new job, and that seems about when I started. And even now, I mean, I when I wake up in the morning, I might write poetry or I might write fiction, unless I have a specific, manuscript or a specific thing that I know that I want to work on. I'll wake up in the morning and sort of, what images come to me, what things I think about.
Are you a morning person also?
I am a morning person. Yes, I feel like I do my best work of the day before 8 a.m.
Oh, okay.
So after 8 a.m., the rest is gravy. And I sort of always think of it like that, that if I can write in the morning, um, the rest of the day is going to be good.
What about the middle of the night?
I am sort of a go to bed at 10 p.m. person. So I don't stay up late. I don't write late. I sort of, again, so, I'll write in the morning. I'll have my job, which takes a lot of my mental energy, etc. And I come home, and usually I'll read in the evenings. And every once in a while, I may have an idea that I just can't shake, and I have to write down.
Uh-huh.
But in general, it's morning. I would say 95% of the writing I've ever done in my life has been in the
In the
morning.
morning. Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah. Are you a morning writer?
I am, I'm a morning person and I'm right in the morning, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I have to write it down.
I think that's always a great idea, and I always tell people that. And I will also confess that I rarely do it. I think part of the reason is that I always feel like if it's a good idea, it'll come back, right? Like, and again, I don't. Sometimes, yes,
Sometimes
exactly.
you lose it in the
Yes,
cornflakes, you
yeah, that
know?
is true. I can see, and you go back to and you're dreaming, and you're having a nice night's sleep, and you wake up, and you're like, I think I I think I was thinking of something. So yeah,
Okay, so let me ask you this about your poetry,
yeah.
about the elements that are most important to you. Is it style? Is it language? Is it metaphor?
I think for me, it's story first,
Mhm.
and then language and image. I'm very
Mhm.
interested in image.
Image.
Yeah, so I would think that's where I start first, and then I think those other pieces, then you get into all the other techniques, line breaks and like you said, metaphor and all of those. So, but really for me, it starts with a story that becomes a poem. Um, yeah.
So do you have a specific theme?
Well, I think we as writers don't get to choose what we write about, right? I think that you end up, so by that I mean, I tend to write about my family a lot, whether they're poems about my son, poems about my father, poems about my mother, poems about my wife, Julie. So I think that most of my poems, I would imagine if you look through my new book of poetry, that again, probably 90% are feature some family member in them. And again, I don't sit down and think that's what I want to write about, but I get up in the morning and that's what comes. Those are the things. And I guess again in our subconscious, we as writers have those things that we're trying to figure out, trying to work through that come to our writing without us even realizing. Um, yeah,
I had some things come through meditation.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
And just, it says, you better write me down and better take care of me and fix me up
right, right. No,
and make me look good.
well, I think one of the things as writers, I always try to shy away from is, we don't, there's a tendency for people when they tell stories to be the hero of the story, right? I mean, in the story, you end up being the hero of the story. And I have to watch that, right? Because, I know I have a tendency to perhaps make myself come off better than I am in real life, in my poems or
That would
relationships.
be fiction.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think that that's one of the things I remember John Irving, the novelist, saying that,
Mhm.
in fiction, you get to rewrite your history, you get to rewrite who you are, even if you're not a particularly nice person in real life. And so, yeah, so I think it does, yeah, come that way.
Hmm. So tell us about your novel.
So I've written 3 novels, but my last novel is called Hopscotch, and that came out in 2017. And so Hopscotch is a novel that takes place at a hospital. So what happens? It's kind of a magical realistic novel in the sense that um, a hopscotch board just shows up on the sidewalk, leading into the hospital. The grounds crew is told to wash it away, and the next day it just appears. And it sort of then becomes a mystery of sort of where is it from? It's about the people who interact with the hopscotch board, whether they're patients, employees of the hospital, doctors, nurses, etc. So, yeah, so it was a novel that I spent a lot of time on and really was really happy with how it came out. But yeah, so
Is there poetry in your novel?
I think that that's a great question because I think that there's no doubt that since I've started writing poetry, that it has affected my fiction, right? So there's no doubt that when I write fiction, whether long form fiction or a 500 word flash fiction piece, that there's poetry there that there probably wouldn't have been 15 years ago, right? There's an emphasis on language, an emphasis on image and metaphor that, again, probably would not have been. So a lot of my writing does sort of cross-pollinate. I do sometimes I'll write a poem and have it as a poem for 2 or 3 months, playing with it, trying to edit it down and do whatever it is that, us poets do.
Revision.
Yeah, revision, just basic revision. And then I think, well, let me try to write it as a flash fiction piece and I'll write it as a flash fiction piece, and it seems to work better at that particular instance. And then other times, something that starts as flash fiction, I'll turn around and write it as a poem, and
pare it down.
Yeah, and you sort of can make it and shape it into a poem. And so, I definitely think the two things, fiction and poetry, have sort of merged in how I write. I think whichever one I'm doing, I think I'm incorporating elements of the other.
So you've been affected by it.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely no doubt that I've been affected by it.
Yeah, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the IT department, I don't imagine there's much poetry.
There's not much poetry in the IT department. I will say that I have, so at the hospital I work at, Cone Health, I mean, I have led a number of workshops, and we've even had a couple of poetry and healthcare literary festivals there. It's been probably 4 or 5 years now, but we have done that. And, I'm okay with that in the sense of as a job. I mean, I like the fact that I write in the morning, I go off, I do this more technical thing. But while I'm doing it, my subconscious, I think, is working on those things that I started in the morning.
Yeah.
They're completely separate parts of the brain, I think.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Well, they say left brain, right brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your right brain at the hospital.
Yeah.
Left brain.
Yeah, when you're writing. Yeah, I think I think the fact I would imagine, I mean, I know more people that, for example, maybe they're writers, but they also do a job where they're writing copy or they're writing websites and, so they're writing all day. And so sometimes I think it's, so it's good to sort of get away from one.
Unmesh.
I think so. But, but we all have our lives and our paths in writing, but that's what so far has worked for me.
So you have been a judge for poetry contests. Tell me what elements of a poem constitute your vote for awarding first, second, and third place prizes?
That's a really good question. I will say one thing before I answer that question, because as soon as you started, I thought about this and I've written a little bit about it. Being a judge for a contest really helped me as a writer realize that so many good things come in and you can't select them all, right? And it can be, the mood that you're in when you're reading. It could be, maybe your coffee's colder than you want it to be. Maybe the dog wants to go for a walk and you're like, oh, let me read one more poem. And so all those elements sort of affect how, and that's why I think, I'm sure all judges think about this, or I would hope that they do, and you try to put yourself in the best possible reading position. I think poems that really catch me, again, my instinct is narrative. So I would probably pick a narrative poem that really, I like poems that surprise me in a way. One of my favorite things about writing is when I surprise myself in writing. And so
I really like that
Yeah,
line.
yeah. Well, I think it's. I mean, for me, if I'm writing and I'm sort of going one way,
Yeah.
and the next line is completely different, I think, not that I think, ooh, great job, Steve, but I think that's you want to surprise yourself, right? I mean, if you know what you're going to do the whole time, it takes a little bit of the mystery of writing. Then you're sort of transcribing.
Yeah.
Don't we want our we want our bodies, our minds to sort of do some of the work and to sort of but anyway, so I love mystery. So I would say again, I mean, usually I would like a narrative. I would like a poem that surprises me in some way, whatever that means. Maybe it's just the last line is something that really surprises me. It's certainly vivid language and images. Yeah, so I think those are the things that I'm drawn to myself. And I also think that whenever you're judging a contest, you've been selected to judge it. And so you really should, and this is my opinion, you really should judge it for how you read the poems, not, for example, what you think the organization wants.
Ah,
So I think that's really important because again, if you're not interested in the type of things that I write and like, don't ask me to
well,
judge.
often academia gives, the other people a kick away because you're looking maybe for some titled person.
Sure.
I always thought that was not fair.
Sure. Or you submit to magazines that they're asking people to send them poems, and so they're taking space from your blind submission. Those are all the things. But we also know, neither one of us are teenagers. We know that life's not really fair in a lot of ways, right? So you just got to keep on pushing. And
Have you ever written a villanelle?
no, mm-mm.
Do you know the form?
I do. Sort of as formy as I get. As I write some sonnets. I'm in a poetry group with Jane Schlinsky, who's a member of the Poetry Society. She's a wonderful poet, and she is really into forms. And so I love reading her poems because it makes me read forms. It makes me, formal poetry. And so, but I haven't written a whole lot of it.
Yeah. They're hard.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure
They're hard. I mean, a villanelle, you have 19 lines to tell it all. That's it.
It's not a lot.
No, it's not
No,
a
it's
lot.
not.
That's the economy of language.
Yeah. And I think, as I've gotten older, interestingly enough, I'm interested in reading shorter things. Not that 19 is too long, but as opposed to I'd rather read poems and short stories than the novels and things like that. I think maybe how I read has changed a little bit as I've aged. So
Stay focused.
yeah, I think that's a big part of it, right? Can't stay focused, don't have as much time, to sit there in the room for 2 hours reading.
Okay. When you conduct your writing workshops at libraries, your audience, are they more young adults or more mature folks?
So great question. So it depends. Yes. So if it's at a library, it's most likely going to be people my age and people in their 40s, 50s, and up. So I did just teach a class at UNC-G, that was 18 to 22, 23-year-olds. But usually in the library, it's older folks, and I think it's interesting because one, those people really want to be there, right? And they're not doing it as a job or as a class requirement.
Yeah.
And they have things to say. And
Yes.
they have experiences to write about.
Well,
yeah. So
life.
Yeah, right. And so I find that interesting. But I also enjoy teaching younger people. I mean, I like the energy and the excitement and how they introduce me to things that I never would have known, whether it's pop culture or different things. So I think that's exciting too.
Yeah. So you're not native North Carolina?
No, ma'am. I was born in Massachusetts, but we moved to Florida when I was 4, and I lived there until I was 30. So basically, I think of Florida as sort of my home, though I've lived here for the last 25 years.
Well, that's long enough.
That's long enough. One more year, and I'll be here longer than we were in Florida.
Well.
But I think it's one of those things, isn't it, where wherever your formative years are, wherever those sort of 10 to 14 year-old years, that, at least in my experience and friends that I've spoken to, that sort of seems like home for a lot of people. But again, my wife and I have been here for a long time, and we we love North Carolina. I can't imagine us not living here.
I can't imagine myself going back.
Where were you at?
Well, I was born in Brooklyn, but I came from Long Island.
Okay.
So
And how long have you been in North Carolina?
We're going to celebrate 18 years in November.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good place to be, I think.
I'm happy. So I would like for you to read a few poems before we run out of time.
Okay.
Because that's what you're here for.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. So I'm going to read a couple poems from my new collection, The Last Time.
Okay.
And so the first poem I'm going to read is, I'm going to read a poem about my father first. As I said, most of these poems are about family members. Okay. And so this first one is called The Last Time. So it is the title poem in the collection. And I would not think I'd have this much trouble finding the poem, but here it is. The Last Time. I found my father on the old porch swing, wearing nothing but white jockeys, drinking coffee and staring out into the yard, the back alley, the 2 tin garbage cans. We've been up late drinking and playing pool. We even tried cards, but our hands were too shaky, our words mere shadow. It's as if we both knew this would be the last time we'd see each other, so we were trying to get it all in. That morning, I didn't go out to him. I went back to the spare room and slept another hour. When I made it back outside, he pulled on a pair of denim cutoffs and Leonard Skinner t-shirt he'd bought at Zayre's, not because he liked the band, but because the shirt cost $2.99. He stood by the old shed watering the purple daylilies until I said, "Hey, you want some breakfast?" When I returned for the funeral 3 weeks later, the lilies were shriveled to almost nothing. I watered then, considered bringing them home, trying to resurrect them, but they weren't coming back. So
I miss your father.
Yeah, so it's a poem about my father. The interesting thing about my father is that, sort of my father died 31 years ago. And so sort of the greater distance, I sort of think about him more and write about him more than I would have probably 10 or 15 years ago. Though a friend of mine recently pointed out to me that all 3 of my novels are sort of father and son novels. So maybe I've been writing about fathers and sons forever, and I just haven't realized it.
So I think we have some time for about 2 or 3 short ones.
Okay, all right. So
don't forget that love poem.
Yep, the love poem is what we're gonna land on. So this one here is called The Last Exxon in Oregon. I'm thinking of the time we vacationed in Oregon, and I almost ran out of gas as we climbed some mountain I can't remember the name of. And Julie kept saying I should have stopped for gas at that last station, and I wish I had, because we're screwed if we run out of gas here in the middle of all those Douglas firs and hemlocks and trees I can't possibly identify. One part of me feels sick knowing we'll be stranded because our AAA membership expired. And the other part thinks, just drive, man. Just drive and it will all work out. So I do, and every minute or so she says, damn. And I'm grateful she doesn't call me an idiot, which I feel like, and which is mostly true anyway. And then up ahead, I see this beautiful square sign, and we pull in beside 6 lovely gas pumps. There's only one other person pumping, a guy in his mid-40s like me, and he has a Volvo full of kids and a wife, and he smiles, says that was close. And then I nod, then walk over to the stranger and hug him at the last Exxon in Oregon. And he seems to know exactly what I need, so he hugs me back.
Oh, that's a love poem.
That's a love poem. I'm going to read one more.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, read one more. So this is another Julie poem. Again, a lot of poems about my wife in this particular collection. This is called Quarantine Haircut.
Okay.
I've had hundreds of haircuts over the years, but never one as intimate as the one Julie gave me yesterday, mid-quarantine, my hair standing up and out of control. And when she could take it no more, she said, "Sit down, bozo." I happily complied, always eager for her touch. She stood over me, cutting, clipping, and buzzing, and I could feel her legs on mine, her forearms brushing my ears. But it wasn't the physical touch as much as the proximity, breathing the same air like we used to do back when the sight of each other would lead to clothes flying, naked bodies moving. But this was a haircut, scissors, a misused beard trimmer, a memory of what was once there. When she asked why I was crying, I said some hair must have irritated my eyes, and she didn't press, only wiped it away, said you're a fool, and she was right once again.
Well, you've done a wonderful job of explaining poetry from your point of view early in the morning, and beautiful poetry. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonia. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
You've been listening to Poets on Poetry. This is Sonia Usatch-Kuhn. Rashawn Media, Peter Rashawn, producer.